The next step is a mandatory reconsideration. And then after that, you go to a tribunal. You can appeal to a tribunal. And you know what? I'm gonna go all the way. Well, it's safe to say that I did go all the way. I went to a tribunal for my PIP application, and today I'm going to tell you all about it. But just quickly, if you're new here and you fancy subscribing, then I do chats on my condition, which is cystic fibrosis. I also do some comedy sketches. I do some vlogs, so if you would like to, then please consider subscribing. Alright, enough of that, let's jump into it. So if you're unaware of what PIP is, then I highly recommend checking out my first video I did in which I talk about what PIP is and the assessment that I went through. I will link it above and below. But just a brief description, PIP stands for Personal Independence Payments, which helps with some of the costs caused by long-term ill health or a disability for people aged 16 to 64. And it all depends on how your condition affects you and not the condition itself. So I'm going to go through everything that happened from the assessment all the way up to the tribunal. So in my last video I had the assessment and I had just received my letter back from that, and out of 100 I scored 0 points. If I'm honest, I felt like I shouldn't take it any further because they made me feel like there was just nothing wrong with me. So since posting the last video, I got a lot of feedback from people in the cystic fibrosis community to speak to the welfare advisor at the Cystic Fibrosis Trust, and thank God I did. She helped me massively in what to do next, in how to write a mandatory reconsideration, and we went through all of the descriptors and how it applied to me. I'll actually link a really handy website that will help you to write a mandatory reconsideration. I'll link that below. So many people told me that all I needed to do was to describe my worst days, and this is wrong. Technically, you should only pick relevant descriptors that apply to you 50% or more of the time, which is something that I did not know. I know a lot of people don't do that, but that's what I've been told, and that is what I did. However, I was told that unless I had new evidence, then my mandatory reconsideration would come back exactly the same. So I asked my specialist CF doctor to write me a letter, which they kindly did, and also the welfare advisor also wrote a letter based on all of the descriptors that applied to me, and I sent all of that off with a letter that I had written to them using that handy little website tool. I sent that all off to them, and within 1 month it all came back and I had scored exactly 0 points. So from there I decided to appeal, to go to a tribunal, and I was sent an appeals form from the Cystic Fibrosis Trust to fill in and send off. And a couple of things to keep in mind with this form is, firstly, and very obviously, you must sign it yourself. You can't get old Bobby to sign it. Who's Bobby? So you must sign it yourself. Very obvious, I know. Secondly, don't agree to less than 14 days notice of a hearing date, and also ask for an oral hearing because I think the success rates are higher. You're welcome. I left the representatives a bit blank because I didn't have one, and that's fine if you don't. And also it's really important that you include the mandatory reconsideration letter in with it, otherwise it won't be valid. Then around 5 to 7 weeks later, I got a bundle of documents from the DWP outlining their case against me. It included everything that I had ever sent to them, so all of the letters I'd sent, even the form that I'd first filled in, and also the assessor's notes from my assessment. Honestly, I couldn't bring myself to read all of it because I read some stuff and I got quite upset. Like, there was some stuff where she had literally copied and pasted what she'd said here and put it under this descriptor. Anyway, so I sent my appeals form off in October 2018, and I didn't hear anything until January 2019, which I think is quite quick actually, because some people have been waiting for months to hear back from them. So in January I received a voicemail from someone from the tribunal, and it was basically about what times were best for me at the hearing, because on the form I had to put all of the dates that I was unavailable for in the next 6 months, as well as the times, and I work for like roughly 10 till 3 I put there, and she said that they only do tribunals from 9 till 3. So I tried phoning them back about 4 or 5 times and I never got to speak to anyone. I was literally on the phone for about 13-14 minutes. Like, it got to a point where I was just like, clearly no one is going to pick up, and I tried different times of day as well. For someone like me who gets so anxious and stressed out about making and taking a phone call, this was really difficult for me. In the end, I emailed them and I didn't hear anything back from them, so I just had to hope that they got my email. So fast forward a couple of months to March 2019 and I received a letter about my tribunal date. I had exactly 1 month. Now, I won't lie to you, but when I got my date for my tribunal, I was so anxious to the point where I said to my boyfriend Tom, I can't go through with this. There's no way I can go to a tribunal. No way at all. I can't do this. I'm calling it off. And Tom said to me, well, you've got this far. You might as well go all the way. If you don't do it, then you'll never know what the outcome will be. And whatever the outcome is, at least you can say that you did everything you could. And I was like, well, annoyingly, the man's got a point and he is right, which doesn't happen very often. So I went back to my trusty lady at the Cystic Fibrosis Trust and she suggested to write a letter and send off any more evidence that I could send. Because basically my letter will be the last thing that the panel reads before they go into a tribunal. So I did just that. I sent out a letter with all of the descriptors that applied to me, and also I pointed out all of the things that the assessor said that I thought was wrong. And that letter and any extra evidence should really be sent off at least 2 weeks before the tribunal date. I sent mine via email, so it wouldn't waste any time. The weeks leading up to the tribunal, I wasn't sleeping very well, I felt drained, and it's always the way that when you're dreading something, it just seems to come around like 10 times faster, right? And this was no exception. And actually one of my friends who was waiting for a tribunal date, she got a phone call from them to say that she didn't need to go to a tribunal because they were gonna award her PIP. And I was so happy for her. At the same time, I kept hoping that I was gonna get the same phone call. And even though I don't like picking up the phone, please ring. So a couple of things that I was told about the tribunal before I went was that the average sort of length of a tribunal would be about 45 minutes long, and that should include the decision as well that they make. So sometimes there will be a DWP presenting officer there. It's not rare, but it's not usual either. And they could ask some like casual questions like, oh, have you been on holiday this year? And you got to bear in mind that when you answer it saying, I have been on holiday, but I needed to recover once I got there. You know, that sort of thing. On the day of the tribunal, I was physically shaking. And that was just in the morning. My tribunal wasn't until 3 p.m. So something that really helped me on the day was to sit down in the morning and go through everything that was worrying me and write things down too, if that helps. By doing this, I realized that I had this expectation of going into that room and standing up like lawyers do on TV and say, Your Honor, this is my case, and under subsection 19C of the Discrimination Act, and then go into depth about my CF. Maybe not quite like that, but I had that expectation, that pressure to be able to speak confidently and openly about my cystic fibrosis in front of strangers. And one thing that my welfare advisor said to me was to remember one word and one word only, and that is detail. And people saying, oh, you'll be fine. You'll be fine when you go in there. You'll be absolutely fine. And I was like, no, you don't understand. You don't know me at all if you're saying that. Because when I get put on the spotlight, my brain goes blank. I can't remember what words are. What are words? That was the biggest worry that I had. And the welfare advisor also said to know your case inside out. And if you want to take notes in, you can. I took a big pink folder in with me with all of my notes, with all of the letters that they had sent to me a couple of months before. But know your case inside out. Going back to the day, my mum drove me and Tom to the magistrates court, which is where it was going to be held. And when I found out that it was going to be held in a magistrates court, I just had this image of, you know, a judge in a wig and slamming down the hammer and going, I object. And so I literally felt like I was being sentenced, but I was told that it was probably more likely that it will be in a room off of the magistrates court. So that kind of put me at ease a little bit, but when we got there, we had to go through security. After that, the clerk came up to us and showed us to the seats in the waiting area. She introduced herself and then she told me everyone who was going to be on the panel. and there are usually 3 people, one of which is the judge, the second of which is a GP, and the third of which is someone who has worked with disabilities before. There is a technical term for it, but I can't remember the actual status name. She even called me Eveling, and I did not correct her. That's how you know that I was so nervous. Now on top of this, because the clerk was in training, she had her manager and her line manager who would also be in the room. So there was already 2 extra people added to the clerk, the judge, the GP and the disability person. So I'd already had 6 people in the room, plus Tom. So then she left and we waited in the waiting area. Honestly, I felt like I was just going to burst into tears because it was all just so overwhelming. So then the clerk lady came back and she was like, your name is Eveling, isn't it? And then that's when I spoke up and I was like, actually it's Eveling. She's like, I've just told everyone it's Eveling. I'll go and correct that. She led us into the room and it was in a proper courtroom. Like not the ones that you see on the TV, because they're always in like Crown Courts, aren't they? But this was in a smaller room. I sat down on a table facing like the judge, who was on like that higher bit. I was sat facing them, the clerk was facing me, her managers were over here, Tom sat next to me here, and then another guy sat down who just turned out to be the DWP officer. Of course he was going to be at my tribunal, of course. Anyone else want to join? You know, we've got the whole crew in here, we might as well. Anyone else, offenders, you want to come in and listen to this? It was clearly evident that I was petrified because the judge was like watching me as I came in, and then he said, there's no need to look so frightened, we've all had our lunch. And that kind of very slightly helped ease the situation a little bit. Very slightly though. So on the table they had a water jug with plastic cups, but I had already bought my own water bottle in, and thank God I did, because you know, classic social anxiety, I'm not going to pour a jug of water, am I, into a cup? No, that's madness, why would I do that? So when I sat facing them, that's when I remembered that I'd forgotten my glasses and I couldn't really see them, so they were a little bit of a blurry outline, which I guess in some way might have helped. So then the judge explained how the tribunal was going to go, and he made a point of asking if I was happy that Tom was there, and I had to verbally consent that. And he also said that if I wanted him to leave at any point, if I don't want him to hear an answer to a question, then all I have to do is ask Tom to leave. And then he said if he doesn't leave, we can just get security in and take him out. And Tom was also told not to say anything until the very end when he is asked. Then he went through who each person was. On his right, my left, was the GP, and on his left, my right, was the lady who'd worked with disabilities before. I know there's a technical term for it. So then he said that the tribunal is based on how I was last year when the decision was made, back in July I think it was. If I've got worse, not relevant. And he said that there's no shame that if you can't remember anything from back then, that's okay. They will just try and reword the question so they can get the answer out of me. So the doctor started off with asking me if I was worse, if I was better or the same as last year, and I said that I was worse. And he was like, I'm very sorry to hear that, but you have to base your answers on how you were last year, which is very difficult to do when you got a brain like mine and I can't remember what I did last week, let alone last year. Some of the questions that he asked then was about Tom's involvement in helping me with my medication. Like, it's nice that Tom helps you with your pills and managing your treatment and stuff, but if Tom wasn't there, would you be able to do it? And personally, I thought that he was looking for a black or white answer, but CF is so much more complex than that. And at one point he did refer to the assessor's notes saying they had written that I could do physio by myself, and he said, but how can you do, you know, percussion on your back? Like, that's impossible. And for the first time and the only time, I felt like he was on my side a little bit. I was like, oh thank God. And then I also mentioned that I struggled to breathe back then because it was hot, and he said, well, what about, you know, in cold weather when it's springtime? And I'm like, well, I get wheezy and tight-chested. There's no winning with CF. He also asked me how far that I could walk with before I needed to stop and take a breath. And I panicked because I don't know measurements. I could not tell you how far away 200 meters is. I could not tell you how far away a mile is, you know. And I literally panicked. I was like, I'm sorry, I don't know measurements. He's like, okay, well, take a look at this room. How far could you walk this room. There was a few times that he would ask a question and I would answer, and then he would say, no, I understand what you're saying, but what I am asking is this. I just felt like completely stupid because that happened a couple of times and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm trying to answer, but obviously you're wanting a different answer. I did feel that pressure that I had to answer in a certain way. Maybe it was just the whole pressure of the whole thing and it was very overwhelming, I don't know. So that was the doctor. The judge kind of mainly made notes and he would jump in a couple of times to clarify a few things. Like there was one moment where he said that the assessor had written down that I only take fexofenadine and ibuprofen. And I was like, well, hold up. I take a few more medications than that, mate. So then I had to go through all like my medications, even though in my doctor's letter and in my forms I stated all the medication I was on. Then the disability lady, she spoke to me and she asked me questions about my social anxiety. She asked me about preparing and cooking food and washing and dressing. And then she asked me about incontinence issues. She was like, do you want your boyfriend to leave? And I was like, no, it's all right. He knows everything. Obviously I didn't say it like that. I was like, oh yeah, it's fine, he can stay, oh please stay. But overall I was 100% right about myself. I struggled massively to go into detail on the spot about my condition in front of strangers. I felt like I could only just scratch the surface of my brain. I couldn't dive deep and tell you, in long formed sentences that this is my condition, how it affects me. It was more like, hey, yes, no, I can, but no, I won't lie to you, it was very, very disjointed. Half the time I was worried, am I even making sense? I don't even know. Again, what are words? Who knows? And maybe, just maybe, that might have helped because they could clearly see that I was struggling with that. So maybe that helped in my defense. I don't know. Obviously, if you can be confident, then do it, but it's just something that I could not do at all. Personally, I felt like I was being interrogated by them. Like I had to prove myself to them because they didn't believe me. But afterwards I said this to Tom and he said, well, I just think they were double checking, making sure they got every single detail right. I also felt like I was being judged the second that I walked in, on how I walked in, on how I sat down, on how I answered, like absolutely everything. There was a moment where someone said to me, oh, but I saw you walk in fine. And I'm like, then I felt like there was a time limit on all the questions that they asked and I felt like I needed to answer as quickly as possible because what was if I took too long? Then they think that I would be lying and all of this sort of thing. Like there's thousands and thousands of things going through your brain at this point, but you just feel so numb. And like I say, I could barely scratch the surface. After the panel had finished asking me questions, then it was the DWP guy's turn and oh my god, he definitely interrogated me. He was trying to justify what had been written in the assessment and trying to make out that the original decision was correct. And at one point I was like, well, that's just not right. And he was like, well, the assessor wouldn't lie. And I was like, eh? And he said other stuff as well, like he was referring back to the very first form that I'd filled in and he was like, this is your handwriting, isn't it? And I was like, yes. And he said, well, you've written this here, but now you're saying this here. So I will get back to that point in a second because that is really important. And after he finished questioning me, the judge said to me if there was anything else that I would like to add. And I had written a few things down in my notes, but at that moment it felt incredibly weak, incredibly feeble to say out loud. And I had this battle in my brain like, do I say this? Do I not? In the end I thought, well, you know what? I'm here once and once only. I'm just going to say it. And what I said was something along the lines of, and forgive me, I know this sounds a tad negative. I don't like being negative on this channel, but I said to them basically that cystic fibrosis is a progressive condition. It's not going to get better and there is always something every single day there, whether that's, sinus pain, whether it's joint pain, whether it's anxiety, whether it's coughing, wheezing, tight-chestedness, whatever it is, there is always something. It's not just black or white. But I'm glad I did say it because, like I said, I probably would have regretted it if I didn't, but just at that moment I was like, this sounds really stupid to say out loud now. And then the judge turned to Tom and asked if he wanted to correct anything that I had said, or if Tom had disagreed with anything that I had said. And then the judge asked me if I wanted to wait outside whilst they make a decision, or whether I wanted to go home and they can send a decision out in the post. And I was like, oh hell no, I'm staying. I need to know right now because I can't let this go on any longer. But at that point I was adamant. I knew that I had lost. I knew that I had not done well because I had messed up so massively with not being able to talk fluently. So then we went out into the waiting room and the DWP guy actually came out with us, and a few minutes later he came over and he said, there's nothing personal in there, it's just I have to do my job. Then he said that he often has to do a lot of tribunals because the DWP often get the decision wrong. And I laughed because I was like, don't I know it, mate? So then we were called back in after about 10 or 15 minutes, and there was a piece of paper on the table that we sat at, and I did not dare look at it. And we all sat down, or all three of us, me, Tom and the DWP guy, and then the judge started to say, taking everything into account, we are going to award you PIP, and it's going to be backdated to when it stopped last year. And they had already sent an electronic copy over to PIP. I would not have to be reassessed for 4 years from my assessment decision date, which was last year, so it'd be 2020. And that is all that I heard because I started to well up. I was holding back so much emotion. I was like, don't be hysterical now, just keep it all in for a second, Kate. So after the judge said I was free to go, I was just like, thank you. And then I thanked all of the panel members. I was in such a state of shock that I accidentally thanked the DWP guy. What an idiot. And as soon as I walked out through that door, oh, it all came out. I burst into tears, I cried like a baby, I sobbed, and Tom hugged me and I sobbed even more. And then I had to walk past the security people just like and they were probably like, she been sentenced? I was like, I don't know. And then my mum, bless her, she was waiting outside the court and she took one look at me and she was like, oh, you didn't get it, I'm so sorry. And she pulled me into a hug and I was like, I did get it. And she was like, you did? And then my mum was crying, I was crying, and Tom was like, let's go to the pub and celebrate. And it was so emotional because it had been going on for a year, and I don't think PIP understand the mental toll it takes to justify living with a condition like cystic fibrosis. You basically have to highlight all the things that you can't do. And that can be so detrimental to your mental health. Not only that, it's so hard to talk to a bunch of strangers openly about your condition. It is such an intimidating thing to do, and at the end of the day, you only get one shot, one opportunity. You just got to make the most of it. We were in there for overall around an hour and a half, which includes the decision time as well. So that piece of paper that was lying on the table when we first went back in there, that piece of paper showed everything that I had got points for, which is really interesting because I got points for things that I didn't think I would get points for, and then for the things that I definitely thought I could get points on, didn't get any. Like my social anxiety, I deal with that every single day. It's such a big part of my life, and that was the bit that I was most confident talking about. I didn't get any points for it. Like, I just don't know how that makes sense. You know, I'm not complaining, I've got the points. It's just a strange little system, isn't it? Like I said, it doesn't just end here. I have to reapply in the next 4 years. Some people have to reapply within 2 years. Some people it's 6 years. So it really kind of varies between people. Now going back to the point where I said the DWP was like, you said this in your original form, but now you're saying this now. I want to explain that. So when I first received the forms, I filled them out by myself, and this was a big mistake. I didn't understand what the descriptors were or how they were to be answered. I just try and get on as best as I can with CF, so I don't really realise like how much I do need help on. But this is just the biggest mistake because descriptors are key. If you have CF, then I highly recommend talking to the lovely lady at the Cystic Fibrosis Trust because she went through each descriptor with me. I didn't think that these things applied to me until she put it in a way that was relevant to CF. And I was like, oh, well now you put it like that, yeah, that does make sense. I do, you know, need help with that. And if you don't have CF, then get in touch with the Citizens Advice. I will leave their link below, or even a social worker, because they will help you answer in a way that is relevant to you, but also applies to the descriptors as well. And I really believe that if I had done this in the first place, when I filled out these forms, got help from a professional, then I wouldn't have had to go all the way to a tribunal. That's just my personal outlook on it. I had to explain to the DWP guy who was saying, yeah, but you're saying this now, but you wrote this here. I had to explain to him that I didn't realise back then, like, how the descriptors actually apply to me. But if you were going through this process, or you were just at the start of it, then please, please, please don't give up. Like I said, I almost did several times. Even when I got the forms, the very first forms, I didn't feel like I could go through with it. I believe, this is just my personal view, but I believe that they give everyone, or a majority of people, 0 points just to see who bites back, just to see who actually wants PIP. I think that if you don't exceed at a tribunal, you can take it further. I'm not sure on that, don't quote me on that, talk to a professional about that, but I think you can. And if you think, oh, it's not worth going any further than this, you know, they've made a decision, I can't be bothered to go through all of that hassle, then think back to what that DWP guy said to me. He said that it's often that they get it wrong. So go further with it, take it to the next level, and keep going, keep fighting. Don't back down. It's exhausting, it's tiring, it's mentally draining, but in the end, it is worth it. God, I sound like the L'Oreal advert, don't I? Because you're worth it. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. I know it's a long one, and on my last video so many people said that that is exactly the same letter that I got. It's just copy and pasted. So if you think about that, if you think about there's hundreds of people going through exactly the same thing as you, it's not just you, it's not just you being singled out. There's so many of us going through the same thing, and that says something about the DWP, that they often get it wrong. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, if it has been helpful in any way, then please give it a thumbs up. And also, if you have any questions about the tribunal, I will try my best to answer them. And drop a comment down below if you have any kind of advice for anyone. Let's all help each other out here. We're all in the same boat, right? And subscribe if you wanna, because I make all kinds of content around my condition, and I will see you in the next one.